Okay, can you hear me now? Hopefully you can hear me now. That is so frustrating. I really don't know why OBS hates me, but we should be good now. So let me know if not. Anyways, so we got that squared away now. So as I was saying, we just looked at the numbers as well. And we're just going to try to see who kind of handled it the best and all that stuff. Anyways, I've said the same thing like 1,000 times. All right, so we're going to start off with the MLB and baseball. So the virus hit before their season start. So if you remember, everything kind of shut down basically in the middle of March, and I just had a brain fart. It shut down in March, and typically preseason starts right around March, and then the regular season starts end of April for baseball. So I think they had just started spring training, but so they obviously canceled those, and then postponed the beginning of their season, and then eventually elected to just play a shortened season. It was 60 regular season games, and then a whole new playoff format. And so their season started, I believe, in July, if I remember correctly. So they started back up in July. They played their 60-game schedule, and the World Series just ended last night with the Dodgers winning. So congratulations to the Dodgers for finally winning that World Series that's eluded them for the past 4 years. So their season has come and gone. We got their full, quote unquote, full season. And so these numbers are from ESPN. And so they extended their streak of consecutive days with no COVID-19 positive tests to 54 days straight through Thursday. Last Thursday, and then it extended all the way till last night, because Justin Turner, who plays for the Dodgers, and I don't really know how this happened. I guess they don't have rapid results for their testing, but so his test came back positive for that day in the middle of the game, so he was pulled from the game in the 8th inning. Because his test came back positive. And so he's immediately pulled from the game and, sent to the clubhouse, I guess. I wasn't watching. I just read about it. But then after the Dodgers won the World Series, he was allowed right back onto the field to celebrate with his team. So just really confusing how they handled it. I don't envy being in that position of in the middle of a crucial World Series game, a player tests positive, and then you have to figure out how to handle it, and then that team ends up winning the World Series, so then you have to handle that whole thing as well. So, it's tough because it's sitting here right now from my desk having zero stakes, I would just say, yes, as soon as they get the positive result, they should have taken him out of the game. I think he should have been, well, it's tough because you could say he should have been taken out of the game and sent home into immediate quarantine for 2 weeks, and then he can get back together with his teammates. But it's the test, they were always tested in the morning, when they would, before they'd show up to the stadium to play. So, they didn't get the result until in the middle of the game, which again, I don't know why that's a thing, but they got it back in the middle of the game. So it's at that point, he's already been in the game. He's already interacted and been around all the players and coaches and staff. So it's I guess at that point, you probably if you were going to get it, you would have gotten it. But it's you can also say, well, there's also a higher likelihood that his teammates would get it when they're celebrating because they're all close up and they're yelling and they're hugging and all that stuff. So I don't know. Yeah, it's tough. But anyways, all that to say that they had gone 54 straight days. So I guess 5, 6, 7, 58. They had gone 58 days straight with no positive results, which is good. But previous to that, there were no positive tests among 3,500 samples collected in the week. MLB has collected 172,740 samples overall, of which 91 have been positive, or 0.05%. So up until last week, which I'm pretty sure this info I believe is from last week, last Thursday. Could have been a little older than that, but it was definitely within the past 2 weeks. So up until then, the MLB had done a total of a little over 170,000 tests. So again, that's pretty much, that's just testing the same 3,000 or 4,000 people every week, because you got to test all the players, all the coaches, the umpires, the stadium staff, everyone who's there. And they only had 91 positive tests in total. 57 of those were players, and 21 of the 30 teams had at least one person test positive. So it hit almost every team. And it was a little more than half of them were players, and then the other portion were, again, either staff for the team, staff for the stadiums, the concession workers or the security teams or the groundskeepers, any amount of people. Which these numbers were a lot lower than I was expecting them to be, because back at the beginning of the season when they first started, it was pretty bad. Like they had, we all know it was, I think, 18 or 19 different people in the who was it? Was it the Cardinals? It was either like the Cardinals or the Phillies, one of those teams. It was like half of their players and staff tested positive in like 1 week. And that was right at the beginning of the season too. So I was like, oh, this is just not good. This is just how the season's going to keep going. They're going to end up having to postpone or cancel their season. But they pushed through and, basically just kept getting positive tests because in total there were like close to 50 different games throughout the regular season that had to be postponed due to positive test results, which is not great. Again, 91 positive results in total, through 60 regular season games and then all the postseason games. It's 0.05%, so it's not that bad. But you'd obviously like to see it be as low as possible and at zero if possible. But and it was interesting too. So throughout the regular season, it was it seemed to be about once a week there was someone on a team testing positive. But then the MLB, their plan was, and what they did was, the regular season was no fans in attendance, but they played the games in the stadiums, but you didn't play your, like, what your normal schedule would be. You kind of played people who were geographically close to you, relatively speaking, because they wanted to limit the amount of travel, which again makes sense, but it's like, why not just make it no travel? But so I think I've talked about this before on the show, but so like the Yankees, for instance, instead of going out west and playing teams like the Mariners and the Athletics and the Angels, and even like the Rangers and Texas, they instead would play normal teams like the Orioles and the Red Sox and the Blue Jays, but then they also would play interleague games like the Mets, the Phillies, the Braves. But so that's the thing is like they even traveled down to like Miami, I think, for a series. So they stayed relatively close geographically. I mean, I guess you can only do so much with sports teams because you don't want to play the same like 5 teams. So, think of that what you will. I didn't think it was the greatest plan, and they were getting positive results. But then once they got to the postseason, they had 2 bubbles, and they had, I think it was the the National League, I believe, was playing all their games in Montreal, and then all of the American League was playing in Toronto, and then they met and played the World Series in Toronto. And that was a bubble style, so all the games were in the same stadium, and teams were all like in a couple of hotels, and they were kind of just like stayed in a bubble, so to speak. But that also brings up a question, though, of how strict or how stringent was their bubble, because a player tested positive during the World Series. So it's like he came in contact with someone who had the virus, which you would think then would be outside of the MLB because no one else tested positive to our knowledge. So was it, I don't know how the MLB was handling it, so I don't know if they were allowed to bring family/friends to the World Series. And so maybe, his partner or a friend or a family member had it and, gave it to him when they came. I don't know. Or maybe he, went out to a bar after one of the games. Who knows? But all that being said, it was some sort of a broken rule, most likely, unless their rules just weren't that strict. But so overall for the MLB, they started off really rough, and I was hard on them when their season started. Rightfully so, because there were teams where they were having double-digit cases, like in single teams. But they were able to really taper it off as the season went down, and then obviously as the postseason started. So again, 91 total positive, or I guess 92 total positive results out of 172,740 tests for a 0.05% positive test rate. Now moving on to the NFL, and this is it's a little tough for the NFL just because their season is still ongoing. They're about halfway through their season, so we can't have like final numbers, but we're still going to look at it. So this information comes from USA Today, and I'm kind of just going to read from the article that I pulled up because it was really well written and it had some really good stuff in it. So again, this is from USA Today. So it says, and I believe this is from last week as well. It says the NFL season is on the brink of collapse. A little dramatic. So far, there have been more than 100 positive coronavirus cases among players and personnel. To date, 2 teams have experienced outbreaks and others have had isolated cases. Aside from routine testing and some basic risk mitigation interventions, masks for coaches and referees during the game, the league has done little to ensure a safe work environment or promote positive public health messaging. In fact, it is promoting a harmful and counterproductive narrative that infections are the result of players misbehaving. The NFL could, however, ensure a successful season, protect players and staff, provide resources to vulnerable communities, and help change the narrative around coronavirus all at the same time. Thus far, the NFL has been lucky. It has administered more than 400,000 tests and has a positivity rate below 1%, which is fairly on par just for the virus in general. And no player or staff member has become critically ill or died, but it's a matter of time, which again, a little dramatic. Even young, healthy people can have devastating short-term and long-term health consequences. Several cases of myocarditis from COVID have been reported in young athletes, and emerging data suggests long-term effects on other vital organs. Of course, the full extent of damage from the virus will not be known for years. Yes, of course we know this. While the NFL has a robust testing protocol, testing is but one aspect of a comprehensive plan. Players are not required to wear masks, coaches violate mask wearing rules all the time, and locker rooms remain small, enclosed, poorly ventilated spaces, making them perfect incubation chambers for COVID. Furthermore, games are being played in coronavirus hotspots, with each game putting people at risk, which again, I fully agree with. Unfortunately, the league has engaged in the harmful narrative that infections are the result of player misbehavior. Blaming is counterproductive to behavior change. Because of the broad influence that the NFL has on American culture, this narrative bleeds into society and makes it more difficult for public health officials to promote and disseminate pragmatic strategies for risk reduction. What then is the league to do? First, the NFL needs to address the safety of their players and staff. It has said that it will not consider the bubble model, though this is a successful model as evidenced by other professional leagues. Opponents of this model say that it will be too difficult to implement since most games are played on Sundays, which I don't know why that is a thing. But I guess because there's too many games going on at once. But the league is already shuffling around games, so moving a few games to weeknights is not so difficult and may also bring in additional advertising revenue. With the newest round, more than 450,000 tests have been given to players and staffers since monitoring started on August 1st, and 47 players and 71 staffers have confirmed positive for the virus, for a total of 108 positive tests. So, I know that was a lot. So essentially, just looking at the numbers, they have the most positive results of any of the major sports leagues that have resumed their seasons or are currently playing their seasons. 47 players and 71 staffers out of 450,000 total tests. So again, it's still a positivity rate of less than 1%, which is good. You love to hear it. But again, it could be 0, and it could be lower. So the thing with the NFL is they are very blatantly concerned about their revenue and their profits more than any other league, because they're wanting to appease the owners who are wanting to keep putting money in their pockets and not lose money, from COVID, which that right there, I think is just something that's a little frustrating, because it's like, well, yeah, like everyone's losing. I mean, it's not, because billionaires are only getting richer, but everyone else is losing money this whole time because it's not a good time right now. And like when it's not good, you're going to lose money. Like that's just how it is. That's how this capitalist society and capitalist engine is set up. And that's how it's set up to fail when something goes wrong, is that it either gets worse by becoming even more capitalist and people just get greedier and only care even more about their money, or it just fails because you're like no one's able to make money and there's no system set up to like help people out. But so all that to say, the NFL, their plan is they're playing all their games as per usual. They're traveling to all the games. There's no travel restrictions. There's no sort of bubble or protocol for any of the players outside of the games. And I don't know what the official rules are, but to my knowledge, I think it's up to the owners to decide / the state that they're in to decide how many, if any, fans are allowed into the stadiums. So like we talked about this a couple weeks ago about how before the season started, Jerry Jones had said, we're going to play every single home game with a full capacity sold out crowd. That has yet to happen. But that was his plan. Meanwhile, MetLife has been very, clear that they will not be allowing any fans into the stadium at all, until this is basically resolved. This being the virus. So, the NFL definitely has the most lax plan. And what bothers me is that, all right, you're going to continue to travel I don't like that, but let's move past that. You're playing like, sorry, my brain is kind of not working. But at the end of the day, it just frustrates me that there's just no protocol, no rules, no guidelines, or anything for the players as soon as they leave the stadium, as soon as they leave the arena. It's just do whatever you want. Life is normal. And so we've seen, and unfortunately for me being a Giants fan, we've seen with my team after this past week, they played the Eagles. And then after the game, both Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley were seen in a full capacity bar with no masks on, just like out and about. And that's proven to be one of the biggest ways that COVID can spread is in crowded public places with no masks or distancing. Now, the Giants have said that they will handle this internally. Who knows what that means? We've seen that when coaches who are required to wear masks during the game, which I'm going to hit on after this, but they're required to wear masks during the game, and they're required to cover both their nose and their mouth. And when they don't, they get fined $100,000 personally. So if Joe Judge, the coach of the Giants, doesn't wear a mask during a game, or he's only covering his mouth during the game, he gets fined personally $100,000 from his check for that time. And then it'll continue to happen every time it does. Whereas the players, it's kind of up to the team, I guess, is what I'm gathering. And the team can just give a slap on the wrist to Daniel Jones and just say, you shouldn't have done that. You're not going to start the game. But, halfway through the first quarter, we're going to put you back in. We'll get back to usual. It's up to them. I mean, they could also fine him and they could suspend him and all this stuff. But, it's the NFL and people are way concerned about their money and winning. So they're probably not going to do that. But so the whole thing with the masks just doesn't make any sense to me, and it bothers me because all of the coaches and staff members for the team and all of the referees and umpires are required to wear masks, like I said, and they're required to cover both their nose and their mouth, which is great. I'm all about it. Cool. But why do the players not have to? And I know what some people may immediately say is, well, when they're on the field, they have their helmets on. So that's kind of a mask in and of itself. First of all, no, because no one's their helmet covers their head, not their nose and their mouth. And second of all, they take their helmets off as soon as they get on the field when they're standing on the sideline. And that's where the most people are. Each NFL team, I think, has a 72-person roster. Add on the staff and the crew and the coaches and everything, you're up to probably about 100 players or 100 people. So that's 100 people on each sideline. You got 70 to 75 to 80 not wearing masks, but then you have the coaches wearing masks. So it's just it's so useless because the players are in the majority and they're the ones who are bunching up and they're the ones who can spread it. It just doesn't make sense. And then what also bothers me is that the referees wear their masks, but then as soon as they go to make a call, they pull down their mask. You're wearing a microphone. You don't need to pull your mask down. We can hear you. You have a mic. It's just useless. It's just don't have the mask then. It's just very apparent that a lot of the stuff that the NFL is doing is just for good PR and for good looks, and it doesn't even look that good. It's frustrating. They're continually having to not cancel. They're continually having to postpone games. They've had to postpone a game, I think, at least every week of the regular season so far. I think almost, I actually can't say that, but I think at least half of the teams have had at least one positive test. We've seen, like this article said, We've already seen two teams have outbreaks, specifically the Titans, who had almost 20 players test positive in 1 week. Um, and again, just like baseball, there's no rules for the players after the game. So it's just really frustrating. Again, over 100 cases so far. Again, it's a less than 1% positivity rate, but it's still over 100 cases, and it could be zero if they just took it more serious and they had a better plan. And again, they could easily do a bubble, because you just do what the MLB did. Send the AFC, have no interleague games in the regular season. Send the AFC to, I don't know, San Francisco, or I don't know, probably shouldn't do that. Maybe you should probably do like a neutral site. So probably do like, I don't know, San Diego or Sacramento, or, I mean, you could even do like Las Vegas, because you just don't have fans. So then you don't have to worry about a home crowd advantage. Just do it in like Vegas for the AFC, and then the NFC is in like Orlando, or I don't know. This isn't my job to figure this out. But just do 2 bubbles, and then do, 3 games on Sunday, a game every Saturday, 2 games on Mondays, 2 games on Thursdays. Even, and then, like the article said, you can move into the week, like put a game on, 1 or 2 games on like a Wednesday night, or add 2 games to Saturday night. Like, you're the NFL, the advertisers will come, the networks will work around you because you bring in so many viewers. It's just you could make it happen, but they just don't want to. They don't want to put the work in. They don't want to have to stress about it. They don't want to have to worry about potentially losing money or fans or whatever. So it's just frustrating, but I think by far the NFL has handled it the worst, and I am not surprised at all by that. Playoff bubbles will likely happen, but regular season is unrealistic for a league like the NFL. Yeah, like, I get it. I to a certain degree understand why they won't do it, because it is a logistical nightmare, and it's a lot of work. We saw that with both the NBA and the NHL of how much work they had to do, and it took months of planning and a lot of deliberation, and it requires everyone in the league involved to spend a lot of time away from their families, and it's tough. But like, if you want live sports back, like, sometimes that's just kind of what you have to do to make it happen. So we'll see what the NFL has planned for the playoffs. At this point, I don't think they're going to do a bubble, because I'm sure they're probably hoping that the virus will be gone by then, and then they can just pack out stadiums and get some money back. Because again, the NFL is just by far the most concerned about getting money into the owners' pockets. So I doubt that we'll see a bubble for the NFL postseason, but I do think it would definitely be smart. I think it would be wise to do that. So that's the NFL, though. And then moving on to the NBA. If you listen to this show, you already know what they've done. But if not, let me give you a quick run through. So the NBA was in the middle of their season in March when the virus hit. They suspended their season for over 100 days and then decided to come back to a bubble in Orlando, Florida. It was voluntary. You didn't have to go if you didn't want to, and you would not be penalized. So there were definitely a certain amount of players who elected to not go. And they essentially, there was 2 or 3 teams, I think, to a hotel. You had to quarantine. You had to isolate, I think, for 48 hours once you got there. And then you basically were in your room or in the hotel on that hot property the entire time. you would take a bus then to your practices and your games, but then outside of that, most of the you know weight training, stretching, massages, all that extra stuff outside of just full court practices were all in the hotels. All the meals and everything were in the hotels, on the properties. So it was a very strict bubble. And if you ever had to leave, for whatever reason, if they had a medical or a family emergency, you were allowed to do so. But then once you came back, you had to quarantine for, I think it was 10 days. And again, you had to isolate in your room for a little while. And this worked to perfection. They played 172 games in total over 3 months, and there was not a single positive test. So, yeah, really not much else can be said about the NBA bubble. Again, it took a lot of planning and deliberation, a lot of work. The NBA lost a lot of revenue. They lost, I think, 10% in revenue this season. I think those numbers just came out today or yesterday. The revenue was down. It's not entirely because of COVID, but it definitely played a big factor. But that was a hit that the NBA, the Board of Governors, the players, and the owners were all willing to take so that they could, A, get these guys back to doing what they love, B, they could finish out the season, strongly, and C, they could just bring live sports back, because the NBA was the first league to bring their sports back, I believe. Maybe the Premier League was, but at least in the United States, they were the first league to bring their sports back, and they made sure to do it the safest and healthiest way possible, and it, like I said, worked to perfection. So really not much more can be said about the NBA. Did you see where Rondo's brother brought in a whole concierge service into the bubble? No. I know that Rondo's brother was definitely causing issues because I know that he came. So I guess that's another part of it, is if your team made it into the playoffs, you were allowed, I think, 1 or 2 guests to come. And they had to isolate when they got there, and they had to quarantine the whole time as well. But I know that Rondo's brother was one of his guests, and that during one of their playoff games against the Rockets, he just started shouting at Russell Westbrook and was actually thrown out of the game, which, pretty rare to see, in a bubble fashion. But I didn't know whole concierge service. That's pretty wild. I don't know if that was in the rules or not, but if his brother's anything like him, I wouldn't be surprised if it was bending or breaking the rules, and being a little difficult. But anyways, yes, that's the NBA. Not much more can be said about it. And then pretty much the same thing for the NHL as well. They played 130 games over 59 days. And there was not a single positive test for them either. They had 2 different bubbles the whole time. They had one in Toronto and one in Edmonton. And it worked to perfection as well. They were able to play their season out, crown a champion, and do it safely and excitingly. It was definitely a different season than usual because they just went right into round robin tournament. But it worked again, 130 games over pretty much 2 months. Theirs was definitely quick. But it worked. They didn't have a single positive test either. So kudos to the NHL for no positive tests. MLS, I tried to look up for the MLS, but I couldn't find really anything. I know that they had a tournament. I think it was a tournament. It was the MLS is Back tournament or something, back in July. But I couldn't find any conclusive information or numbers about what the MLS did or is doing, or what their test rate looked like. So I got nothing for the MLS. And then finally, I thought it'd be fun just to kind of look elsewhere. So I got some numbers for the Premier League, because I think they're probably the biggest sports league outside of the U.S. Um, so Premier League, and this is information comes from Sky Sports, and this is all for this season because they were also in the middle of their season when they postponed it, but then they came back, finished their season in the summer, in the early summer, and then picked it back up in either late August or early September, I believe. So for the Premier League, they've had 42 total positive cases out of 11,195 tests for a 0.4% positive test rate. And they have a similar setup to the MLB where they're playing their games in the home stadiums and they're still traveling for the games, but fans are not allowed in. And again, I don't know how they did it last. I'm pretty sure the way they finished their season was that same way, where they continued to travel. They didn't have any sort of a bubble or anything. I didn't find numbers for that. It was just going to be too buried in the searches to find it for how last season finished. But again, not too bad. 42 cases could be worse, could be better. 0.4% positive test rate is pretty on par, I think, for other, for like the MLB and NFL, excuse me. Yeah, I think they were pushing, from what I was reading, it sounded like they were really pushing to get fans back into the stadiums, even for last season, for the end of last season. But, the UK, their government, kind of decided against it because they were in a pretty intense lockdown quarantine situation for a while there. But again, it's just one of those things where it's like, it's not bad. It could be better. And the interesting thing too with the Premier League is that they've gone to, I believe, an entirely pay-per-view schedule for their games. I could be wrong. I don't really follow the Premier League or soccer in general at all, but yeah. It's, I don't know. I just feel like they could be doing more, but it's just, I don't know. It's tough. It's really tough. I don't envy being in these positions to be making these decisions because it's just when you've seen bubbles work, like we saw it work entirely for the NBA, entirely for the NHL, and pretty much perfectly for the MLB for their postseason. We know that they work, and it's just, they're not willing to put in the effort for them. But yeah, and like the pay-per-view thing, again, I don't know if that's for every game, but if it is, I think that's a little much. I think that's a little bit of a bummer and just a pretty overt way to make some money back for them. Because it's just like, I know that last season ended with them airing every single game for free. And I think a lot of them were either on NBC Sports or BBC, and almost all of them were like internationally live, like shown on TV. And then they kind of took a 180, and now it's just like they're all pay-per-view. Which, I'm sure it's not, $40 a game. I would imagine it's probably between $5 and $10. But again, I don't know. I haven't looked into it. But it's just a weird time for sports, man. And to be trying to balance profits and continue to make revenue while also keeping players and coaches and fans safe, and also, providing the best quality sports kind of, entertainment you can for people, because it is a great escape, for fans. But overall, I think you can't argue that the NBA and the NHL both tied for handling it the best. They both had 0 positive cases, so can't argue that. I'd say I'd put MLB next and then NFL dead last, because they just really don't have much of a plan outside of coaches have to wear masks for no reason, and not all fans are allowed. NBC is running Premier League on Peacock for $9.99 a month. Okay, so that's not terrible. And I'm assuming that's for all the games, so that's really not that bad. $10 a month to watch all the soccer games. Again, I'm not a huge. I don't really follow soccer, but I'm trying to imagine like if they did that for the NBA. But it's different because you can't always watch all the soccer games for Premier League because it's international. But I probably would pay it honestly because it's like, hey, I know that it's going to be probably 3 months to do it, so $30 to watch every single NBA game, in HD and stream it. That's not bad. MLS did a bubble at Disney as well. Oh, okay. I just I don't know why I couldn't find anything for the MLS in my research. I kept I scrolled. I went through multiple pages. I tried different keywords, and I just couldn't find anything about what they did or what they're doing and what their cases looked like. So they did a bubble at Disney as well. Interesting. Well, yeah. So that's kind of all I really want to talk about was just kind of look at each league, how they handled it, what their protocol was, and then how it worked. So again, NFL season is still going on, and we've already seen that it's not working for them. So I'm interested to see if they adapt at all moving forward, and if they change anything, if they try to go to a semi-bubble or a full-on bubble for the postseason. I hope they do, but we'll see. Excuse me. But yeah, so that's kind of all I want to cover for today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you're here live on YouTube, thank you for tuning in and for joining me on YouTube. I know this is different than Facebook, but hopefully it was just as good. Let me know how the video quality was because that was the main issue for me. But yeah, and then if you're listening to the audio, thank you for listening to the audio as well. I appreciate you checking out this show. And with that being said, I will see you guys in the next episode. Peace.